Hey everyone, welcome to ProgPod again. We have a very special episode today.
Special edition.
Yeah, special edition ProgPod that we've been keeping a secret from you.
Yeah.
Dean Marsh, the lead composer, guitarist, keyboard player,
Sometimes bass.
dabbles in bass as well, of Gandalf's Fist, is doing an interview with us.
Yeah, he actually reached out to us when we talked about our top 50 favorite songs of all time, and The Lamplighter parts 1 through 8 was the number 15, I think, on your top list of all time, and it was odd because a couple hours later he commented on it. He's like, "Oh, thanks for the compliments and stuff. Really appreciate that you guys enjoy my guitar playing and everything like that." And we asked him to do an interview, and he agreed.
Yeah, so we're very excited about that, and we want to thank him so much for agreeing to do that.
Yeah, so the interview's done in a slightly interesting way. So because he's from the UK and a very, very busy guy, it's difficult to align the schedules exactly. So we actually we wrote the questions and then sent him the questions, and then he sent us back the answers. So we're going to read the questions and then have his responses afterwards. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a live interview or anything.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And also he actually gave us permission to debut 2 new songs from the upcoming album, the Clockwork Prologue.
And the songs he sent us are called Solar Huntress and the Clockmaker. And we are going to put those on the podcast after the interview and let you guys all listen to that. We've listened to both songs already. I've actually listened to both songs twice now. I enjoy them a lot.
I also really enjoy them.
I think they're very, very good. And it's got me even more excited for the new album. So yeah, those 2 are going to be featured at the end of the interview, and we're also going to feature a Clockwork Fable song at some point during the interview.
All right, so our first question we want to ask is actually, how did you discover our podcast? Because we're pretty new and very obscure. We have a couple listeners, and most of them are related to us, honestly. And you commented on it a couple hours after we after we posted it. So we were just both really curious how you found out about our podcast.
So, hi Eric, hi Brandon. Thanks very much for having me on ProgPod podcast. It's great to be here and answer some of your questions. Well, one of the things is we're a very small fish in a very big pond, and I'm sure it's sort of quite comparable to how you guys are starting out doing your podcast. And whereas you're up against, radio stations with hundreds of thousands of listeners, and whenever we put out an album, we're up against multinational corporations spending millions and millions of pounds on their releases. So what we like to do is we like to keep our ear quite close to the ground. Because it's just us doing it, we tend to be able to pretty much pick up any coverage we get anywhere, and we've got a little system in place so that we can sort of check that on a weekly basis, and we basically go through every little bit of coverage we've got, and if it's positive then it's great, if it's negative then that's cool as well, at least we sort of know about it. But one of the things that happened was it sort of pinged up in our little methodology of finding out where we've been mentioned here and there along the expanse of the internet. And one thing that particularly interested me was the title of your video, and the fact that you picked out one of our songs as one of your top songs is instantly flattering. Doesn't matter who it comes from. It doesn't matter if it's on a national radio station or in a magazine, or like you 2 guys just talking on a podcast. So instantly pricked our attention. We had to listen, and we thought the podcast was great. It was a great structure, great concept, well presented, sounded great. So yeah.
So our next question, we're both pretty curious, how did you get started out as a musician? What made you want to become a musician, and what were the influences in your life that led to that decision?
I would argue that I've never got started as a musician. I've never had a formal music lesson outside of the ones that you laughingly get exposed to at secondary school up until the age of about 13, 14, I guess. And they stick one of those crappy classical guitars in front of you, and then you sort of muddle your way through some worksheets and that kind of thing. So I've never really had a music lesson. What actually happened was I got given an electric guitar as a present from my mum for passing my exams when I was 16, and instantly just became addicted to playing it. I spent hours and hours and hours practicing. I just got immense satisfaction from it. And by the time I came back into sixth form, all my mates were already in a band and they asked me to join, and absolutely loved it. It was great fun, got really enthusiastic about it, and sort of put it on hold for a little bit while I went off to university. And then while we were at university, I met Luke, another member of the band, and we just had a real good laugh coming up with silly musical ideas that weren't ever meant to be heard by anyone, but it was sort of the genesis of people being able to put MP3s on the internet at that time. So we put a load of stuff on there, and it sort of really grew from that, and it became very silly, the fact that people were listening to the stuff, and we sort of treated our early sort of foray into putting our music on the internet as almost just like kind of a band simulator game, if you like. We were just really intrigued as to how far we could take pushing it, and how many people we could get to listen to some silly songs that we sort of cooked up on my flat in Newcastle. And then things sort of took a turn for being quite serious when we realised people really were enjoying what we were doing. So we recorded a couple of albums quite crudely, and got picked up by a few magazines, and then we decided, well, here we go, we got it, we've got something that even if a few people are listening to, we can put stuff out that is not just for our own listening pleasure. And that's what it was originally to begin with. It was for our own pleasure. We were putting out music that we really liked and we would want to listen to, and then we found out other people like that too. So in terms of starting out as a musician, I'm waiting to start. So anytime soon I might start right now. I might start after breakfast, maybe start tomorrow, but I'll be sure to let you know when I actually do start.
So obviously the whole Clockwork universe is very intricate and detailed, and listening to the album you can really see how much thought went into it, and we're just both really curious how you constructed this awesome world.
So Clockwork Fable is just a one in a long line of concepts that we've done. All of our albums have been conceptual because we like telling stories, and we have a lot of fun coming up with the characters and things. So the first couple of albums were loosely based around fairy tales and things like that, and we put our own spin on them. And then we did Universal Wanderer, which was an idea around science fiction short stories, again, that we put our own spin on it. We did Forest of Fair, which did really well, and that was again based on a sort of Alice in Wonderland style twist. So we just kept doing all these little twists on pre-existing fairy tales, and that was sort of our niche for a while. And we decided when we were coming up with ideas for Clockwork Fable that we wanted our own story this time. We wanted a unique story that wasn't based off anything else, wasn't a twist on anything else. So we wanted our own story. So that was the main sort of thinking point behind it. We also were quite clear from the outset that we wanted narration in between it. Because we wanted that earlier on, to be honest. We tried it a little bit with Universal Wanderer, where we put some narration tracks at the start and some little bits popping up throughout songs. And then we really wanted to go full tilt with that sort of narration War of the Worlds thing with Forest of Fair. And we had a lot of that planned. So by this point, we got Stefan on board as a drummer for Forest of Fair. And he was really keen for that as well as me and Luke. And we come up with this idea where we would have all of the anthropomorphized animals, the magical creatures of the woodland, their little side adventures that were happening alongside the main story there would be sort of chronicled in a sort of almost like a kid's storybook kind of way. But sort of proto what happened in Clockwork Fable. And we recorded some of that stuff as well. So there's one bit where there's this weasel called Cornelius Hattington. Stefan came up with that name. And he is like a hat maker for all the landed gentry animal badgers and stuff that live in the forest. And there's a bit where he's late for his date with a peacock lady. And then he crashes his bike. And he gets into a right muddle and all this kind of stuff. And we did record the narrative parts of that. And then when we listened back to it, we were like, oh my word, that shit. So we didn't use it. And it's funny enough, when we're looking through old demos in pre-production for what we're going to do next, come across that, and I listened back to it and just thought, wow, what a big leap from that idea to what eventually happened, only like, a year or so later when we started Clockwork Fable. So it actually coming up with the story once we had this in our head. It was actually, we toyed around with, we wanted this underground sort of aesthetic. We've bounced a few different ideas around, but we really like the idea from War of the Worlds was where we were taking a lot of our cues from, the Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds. And there's a bit in it where the artilleryman's talking about, we'll start a new life under the ground. And we'll start fresh underneath the surface, and then on the gatefold of the LP, right in the middle of it, when you open it out, you've got a wonderful painting of what life would be like under the ground in his imagination, and there's people playing cricket and that kind of thing, and there's a full city glowing underneath the ground. So we thought, what if that happened for real? What if there was this city that just trundled along for hundreds of years under the ground, and it was sort of where we are today, if 100 years ago, if in Victorian times people had to go down into the bowels of the earth, what would life be like if that city still existed today? So that was the idea. So then we had to come up with the story. And it was actually on the morning of my wedding. Luke was my best man. And we were sat having a chat, practicing our speeches and stuff in the morning, all getting ready and getting suited and booted and stuff, and maybe to belay our nerves or whatever, or to just sort of mix things up rather than just chatting about wedding stuff, which we had been for a considerable amount of time at that point. We just started talking about the new album and the story, and pretty much the whole idea came out in that 10-minute chat that we had over a coffee in the morning. And we were like getting really enthusiastic about it. We were saying, oh yeah, there needs to be this, there needs to be that, there needs to be a Clockwork Boy and one of these like hot air balloons that people can pedal around, because there wouldn't be any engines, it'd be all steam powered and that kind of thing. So we come up with it pretty much all in that morning. And then of course Chris, the bass player, is an old friend of ours as well. So while the sort of wedding was going on, I'm sure Luke was saying, hey, we've got this crazy idea for the album, and they'll be talking about bits and bobs at the wedding. And by the time we came round to the next day chatting about it again, it still seemed like a really good idea. So we just sat down and we sort of collaborated on a script. We used a website that allowed us to type into the same document. So it wasn't just one of us writing it. It was a collaborative effort to begin with. And then we had the outline of the story pretty quickly, and all of what happened and all of the scenes, all of the characters. And once it was all typed up, which Luke did a big part of, me and Chris sat down and we just really added a lot of the character and humour and dialogue to it, because we've got silly sense of humour, a lot of us, and we sat down and over a course of one evening just edited it one evening with a couple of glasses of whiskey and a couple of cans, and just had a great laugh, just sat around the table just making it as bonkers as possible. And then that was it. We had the story, and just trying to get that to actually happen was the task for the next year.
So speaking of the Clockwork Fable, throughout the album, the voice acting is amazing. It's shoocking good. Not only do the voices reflect the characters perfectly, but they also sound amazing. So we wanted to know, how did you find and select the voice actors for that project and the future project, the Clockwork Prologue? What is the process for finding those actors to get the sound you want? I don't know, just how do you make those characters come to life, basically?
So in terms of finding the voice actors, the first thing that happened was we approached Mark Benton, who's a big fan of this genre, is a big fan of prog. Sitting down and chatting to Mark, you can have a really good conversation about music with Mark. He's a very musical person and he absolutely loves prog rock. And once he was on board, that was just all systems go, really, because it became a proper project. And Mark's a fantastic actor and an absolutely sound bloke, and he was able to recommend people to us that he thought would be good for the parts, because we don't know actors, we don't know casting agents or anything like that. So Mark absolutely came up with the goods in terms of thinking of people that he knew that would be good for the parts, and we sort of trusted him to a certain extent on that one. In fact, more to a certain extent, we explicitly trusted what he was saying and the people he was suggesting, and it was sort of a last minute thing, really. We had the recording studio booked, and he pinged out a few emails and said, these to the people, and said, this is happening tomorrow. Do you want to be a part of it? And they were like, yeah, sure, sounds great. And Bill Fellows is an absolutely fantastic bloke and a great character actor, and he plays a few parts on it. And Tim Munro, I can't imagine anybody else playing the Tinker. Tim had been in Doctor Who for a number of episodes in the 70s, I think, or maybe early 80s, and playing a sort of recurring part. And it's funny, like the Clockwork Fable, we sort of wrote with that sort of Doctor Who sort of idea where you've got the mad sort of professor, nobody's quite sure of their agenda, a bit bonkers, but obviously quite eccentric and all that kind of stuff, with a female sort of assistant, very Doctor Who sort of thing. And, Tim instantly got it and ran with it. And, if you hear Tim playing the Tinker, you should be thinking, well, this guy could easily play Doctor Who on the TV. He's got that sort of, he's got that down. And in terms of other actors that are on it, so we sort of looked far and wide for somebody to play Eve, and it just transpired that Alicia, who is actually my wife, who'd done voice narration on the previous albums that we'd done, bits and bobs here and there, she had a go at it and absolutely smashed it. So it was like, well, that's a relief. Other actors that are on there, we got Zach Gallagher, and that was a complete and utter coup. I couldn't believe that Zach is on this album. I still have to pinch myself a little bit. Zach Gallagher, for those of your listeners who don't know, is an American actor, and he is the guy who played Billy in Gremlins. So obviously the main guy that isn't the puppet, the kid who gets the gremlin, that's Zach, and he plays the Steam Ranger on our album. And I couldn't believe it. I sent him an email and said, do you want to be part of this? Sent him the script, and he absolutely loved the idea of Cocktoplis. He was so enthusiastic about it. He did so many takes and different notes and stuff on his character. He was insistent that he wanted to do it in a British accent as well. In his words, I was chatting over Skype to him when we were the day before we were going to record it, because he recorded it in America. And he was like, right, I don't want to be the only Yank in Cocktoplis. So he did a British accent. He's got a lot of British friends. He's over in the UK quite a lot. He did that, which was great. And, he was, asking about the pronunciation of the different fictional towns and stuff. So it was great to have him on board. A case of, putting out a casting call or anything like that. Once we had the idea of who was playing what down, and especially with Mark playing the lamplighter, we obviously knew very early on when we were writing the script that Mark wanted to be involved. So we wrote the sort of idiolect the words around Mark, because obviously we know Mark quite a lot before we even met him. I knew him quite a lot from his TV work and his film work. I was a big fan of his for quite a while, and seen him in quite a lot of stuff, and I knew what a good actor he was, but I also sort of had a good sort of sense about what kind of thing he would be able to do and bring to the role. So we wrote the dialogue specifically for Mark, and he suggested a couple of names for the Tinker and Tim and stuff. And when we sort of thought about the mad sort of professor, and we didn't particularly write it with one actor in mind, but Mark knew that it was going to have to be somebody who could pull off that sort of like posh bonkers sort of stuff. So Mark was the only one we particularly wrote it with him in mind, and the rest of them were sort of almost seemed to be, the planets aligned, and they seemed to be perfect for the roles, and we couldn't imagine anybody else doing them.
Now, on a similar note, the production overall is just fantastic. Like, you can hear all the instruments perfectly. You can hear the bass guitar, really well. You can hear everything so well. The voices sound really clear. And we're just curious how you're able to achieve such great production as such a small band. We both know of bands who are like world famous bands who have seemingly all the money in the world and all the resources to throw at a project, but then it sounds way worse than the Clockwork Fable, So we're just both curious how you're able to do that.
I agree. I think the album sounds great. I think each one of our albums sounds that little bit better than the one before, and that's a massive compliment. Thank you very much for saying that it sounds better than some high end albums, in inverted commas, that have had lots of money thrown at them. That means a lot because I record and produce the albums. Up until that point, pretty much by myself. Stefan premixes the drums in his studio in Germany, and then I will sort of record and produce everything else in my little home studio kind of thing and mix it. And right up until Clockwork Fable, I was mastering them as well. So that's a massive compliment. Thank you very much for saying that. Each time, like I say, I just got a little bit better at the craft in terms of never having a music lesson before. You know, I get better at playing the guitars and synths and mandolins and basses and even singing. I get better at that as the albums go on. And having never had any formal training in... sorry, I'll just bash my head against the microphone there. I never had any formal training against how to record and produce stuff. And... just sort of dove into it, didn't read too much on it, didn't really, watch any YouTube videos or anything like that when we first started out. And we just sort of learned by trial and error and EQing and get my ear getting a little bit better about what sounds good and what doesn't sound good and little techniques. Learning quite organically, which probably isn't the best way to learn because, you know, my mistakes are then published out to the world for people to listen to any inadequacies in my techniques in creating an album. But it's very honest, you know, there's not anybody coming in and, giving it a massive big polish and sheen and stuff like that. It's very honest. It's what we've created to the best of our ability. And when you listen to each album, you can see that we're getting better, we're getting sounding better. That's exciting for us. And it also means that we've got a challenge. Somebody who's relying on somebody else to sound great, you know, I'll do the performance and sort of dust off the shoulders and think, right, let's sit back and wait to hear how good we sound. And it's up to us, really. We have to push ourselves to make sure that we sound better. So it's out of passion for what we do. It's out of, passion for learning. And yeah, it does sound good. And I think the next album, the Clockwork Prologue, it sounds even better. You know, it sounds like it fits in the same world. You can listen to them back to back. Definitely, and your ears won't notice a massive difference in the production because Clockwork Fable did sound great, but Clockwork Prologue, it sounds even better, man. It really does. So I'm looking forward to everybody getting to hear that.
So obviously, I've raved about the Lamplighter parts 1 through 8 and the Clockwork Fable as a whole, and particularly the solo at the end is very good and emotional. How did you what was the writing process like for that solo? Because I feel like it just fits the song so perfectly, and I think it's really cool, especially how the solo is kind of like in two parts, where it has first part, and then there's the female vocals in between it, and then it's almost like the solo picks right back where it left off. And I want to know if that was intentional or not, or if that's just how I hear it. I'm just curious about the writing process for that particular solo.
Well, Lamplighter, the song, the first part of the song was pretty much the first thing that I wrote for the album. I wanted it to capture this sort of melancholy idea. And we've done a lot of folky stuff in the album prior to it, and a lot of space rock stuff in the album previous to that. I wanted a song that was just sounded, had a scope for a lot of the classic rock elements that I love. So a lot of driven Hammond organ and things like that. So that was, in my mind, I wanted to have, a verse that had some, a mellotron, and I wanted to have some Hammond solos, and that, piece by piece, put it together. And then when it comes to do the solos, I don't really write them. I will have a couple of stabs at them, get a general idea for what works, and if I listen back the next day and it doesn't work, then we'll have another stab at it. But I'm not piecing together, sitting down and thinking too much about what's going to go where. It's very instinctive. Lamplighter, I think it was a couple of takes, quite tricky because there's a weird sort of chromatic thing that happens in some of the parts there that is a bit out of the sort of usual key for that particular song. So there's that sort of dictates to me what notes I can and can't play there, just by ear really. I play everything a little bit by ear, so that gives it a little bit of a unique quality there, because it sort of catches you off guard a little bit, the chromatic stuff, when you're sort of noodling away on top of it. It was all pretty much improvised, and once I decided on the basic structure of it, had a couple of takes to sort of even it out. But the original idea is, the solos are always pretty much an improvised idea, and then that sort of rings true as well when we play these songs live, because I don't sit down and learn them. It's probably laziness, but I like the improvisational part of it, of playing solos. That's the fun part. Otherwise, it's just like any other piece of music. You've planned it out. A solo, I think, should always be a bit spontaneous. So when we play the songs live, I will learn sort of key phrases and sort of beats or markers or licks that I want to hit, especially with like a song that's got a crazy long solo, like Gathering of the Clouds or From a Point of Existence. I'll learn the sort of memorable phrases from that, and then the rest of it I'll improvise. So yeah, it's all improvised pretty much, and I've got no real memory of writing it. Listening back to it, it sounds great, it fits the music. It's not my most flashy solo. I think the flashiest solo, actually, the solo I like the most that I've done, two solos that I like the most that I've done. The first one is on Stowaway to the Mushroom Planet. I think that sounds cool. It really rips. And actually on one of the new songs from the new album, Wardens, that's got a real sort of classic rock sort of Guitar Hero style solo. Not flashy, no sweep picking or anything like that. Just really killer sort of, licks and groove going on there. Luke's favourite solo that I ever did was on the Regency Rascal. From our Songs from the Solo EP. He keeps pushing for us to play that one live, but we don't have a steel drum player in the band, and there's a lot of steel drums in that song. So yeah, it's an improvised solo, and they all are.
So, we talk about a lot of different bands on this podcast, and we're just curious, what's your favorite band right now?
My favourite band right now is Gandalf's Fist. That might sound really arrogant, but it is. It always has been. We're not one of these people who say, once we made a record, we never listened to it. We're proud of it, Luke's banned from playing his own music in the car because his wife Helen's sick of hearing it. I'm sure it's the same for in my house. We love the music we do, and when we listen back to it, we not only feel pride in what we've accomplished, but we enjoy listening to it. So one of my favourite bands is Gandalf's Fist, absolutely. In terms of other bands, I'm pretty much stuck in my ways. When you are recording something in your spare time, it's very hard to then find time for listening to new music. So now that we've approached the end of the production for this and we've finished mixing it, it's all mastered, it's all in the bag, maybe have a little bit of time to sort of investigate the wider scene and everything that's happening. I get sent stuff, Stefan recommends stuff for me to listen to and maybe listen to it a little bit in the car, but I don't have a standout favourite band at the moment, and maybe that's something that I would like, over the summer, for something to capture my imagination and really discover something new. So once everything's packed up and I can pack up all the microphones and stuff in this little studio, it's my number one quest to find a new favourite band that isn't one that I listen to on rotation already, like Pink Floyd or King Crimson or Iron Maiden or Deep Purple. Obviously, these are my favourite bands, but it's high time that Dean's got a new favourite band, and we'll see what sort of comes out of the sort of investigations that I'm going to do. What I will say, though, is in terms of records that I've been buying and sort of stuff from existing artists and stuff, that the new Griffin album really caught my imagination. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and Dave Oberly from Griffin has been on a few of our records. I thought that was a brilliant record. It was brave, it was bold, it was in their style, and it sounded fantastic. So that was one of my favourite releases of the last year, definitely.
So this is a little segment we're going to do in this interview, and if we have another interview ever, we're going to call it From the Horse's Mouth. and we're gonna have musicians describe the meaning and or inspiration behind a particular song, and maybe even describe a bit of the recording process. Pretty much, we just want as much info behind a particular song as you want to give us. And so the song we picked for this segment is "Victims of the Light." So we're just curious about basically like musically the recording process, lyrically what it specifically means to you, or how like something in your own life influenced that particular song lyrically and musically. So we're just curious about that.
All right, so Victims of the Light, it's links in quite nicely to what I was talking about before, because the vocalist on Victims of the Light is Dave Oberly from Griffin, who also guested on the album prior to that, Forest of Fey, on the song Return from the Tournament. When Dave said he was going to come back and be a singer again, I was thrilled, because I absolutely love his singing style, and I love his work with Griffin, and it's a real sort of fanboy moment to have him sing on one of my own songs. Last time, what happened with Forest of Fey and Return to the Tournament, there's this acoustic reprise of one of the earlier songs, and the musical section from Circus in the Clearing. And on that musical reprise, it's got the whistles and bouzouki played by Troy Donockley, who's been in loads of stuff. Most famously at the moment, he's in Nightwish. But he played the instruments on a lot of that song. And it really did sound very, very, very folky. And to listen back to it at that point, me and Stefan said, "Oh, this sounds like Griffin." So we should get, incidentally, anybody listen to it who hasn't heard of the 70s, well, contemporary now, prog band Griffin, you should definitely check them out. You need to go and listen to that straight away. But we set about looking for a guest vocalist, because we were very keen to have guest musicians on that album to sort of help propel us forward a little bit and do something new. So we set about looking for a singer that sounded a bit like the singer from Griffin. And in the end, we asked the singer from Griffin, and I chatted to Dave on the phone about it, and he was absolutely thrilled to be a part of it. So it was, for that album, it was about, the song reminded me of something that Griffin might do, so we approached Dave. But it was the other way around for Clockwork Fable and Victims of the Light. Because I knew that Dave was going to be singing on the album, I wrote the song specifically for him, for his voice, for what I knew that would sound good with Dave, and so I specifically wrote it with him in mind. And I get quite a long commute. It takes me about an hour to drive to the college that I teach at, and that's a great time for writing songs. So I'll be singing them, and I come up with the melody and the verse for Victims of the Light while driving to work one day, and I came up with it about 5 minutes into the journey, and then I had to keep singing it over and over again for an hour, the same line over and over again, because I just was desperate not to forget it. So I pulled into the car park at work, still singing this thing that I'd been singing for an hour, same line over and over again, and then got my phone out, hit record, recorded it. So I was like, phew. Everyone else in the car park is watching me in my car singing into my phone. I must have thought I was a madman. So that was captured then. I knew the melody, planned it all out. Got some sampled crumb horns. They aren't pre-existing samples, they're the individual notes. So then performed it on a keyboard. It sounded realistic. So the crumb horn performance on it isn't real. It's through a synthesizer, through a sampler, the melody. But we wanted them in there because we wanted to have that nod to Griffin, who famously used a lot of crumb horns in their music, and I couldn't imagine having, the singer from Griffin on a song, having Dave on the song, and not at least having some crumb horn on there. So that's why they are on there. Obviously I kick in and I sing the chorus, so it's a little bit of a duet sort of thing going on there. Luke wrote the lyrics for the bit where it kicks into gear, the sort of "this is Shadowmass" part. And Dave was like, right, we need some rollicking Boron on this, and he put it all on there. And when he listened back to the mix, as what most musicians were doing, was just like, well, can't really hear my Boron very much, that Irish drum, so can we change it? It's like, sure, let's have another go at the mix. And it ended up on Dave's suggestion, was at one point we just drop out all the instruments and you can just hear his percussion and the bass, and then it kicks back in, which is my favourite part of the song. And that was through Dave listening to the rough mix and sort of suggesting it. And when we tried it, it was just like great suggestion. It really adds something to the song. Listening back to that song now, it's one of my favourite songs on the album. I think sonically it sounds great. It's got a great vocal performance. It's got a great flow to the song. It's catchy. It's a good melody. And that's why when we promoted the album, when we were putting songs on cover mount CDs for like Prog magazine and stuff like that, we picked that song because it maybe isn't indicative of the rest of the album, but it's a really great song.
All right, that was a great explanation by Dean Marsh, and now we're actually going to play the song Victims of the Light.
Come gather round all you travelling souls, for a tale I have to tell. On the lies you feed from the devil's machine, it'll send you straight to hell. It'll drag you kicking and screaming, embrace the father of the night. Pray the darkness be our savior for the victims of the light. Of lies are damnation, and you know I'm always right. Crave the lamps that burn above this world, I could see it in your eyes. And you thought that you were dreaming, but you're only going blind. Pray the night keepers keep you safe, my child. You're the victims of the light. Darkest dawn, take me home and baptize our hearts of stone. Darkest dawn, take me home, speak the shepherd of our soul. Does your hunger grow from the brass-bound man? Claws his fingers at the sky. When he touched the stars and he craves the dawn, it's a sickness on his mind. And somewhere in the future, where we all will join the night, you will curse the sun that failed you. Now the victims of the light. Darkest dawn, take me home. Let the lamps grow dim, pray the wheel keeps turning on. Pray for nuclear war and what came before, from a time we don't belong. And you see this world as children, and you place your hope in light. You can feel the night surround you, sleep the victims of the light.
And so, my children, on this Shadowmass night, fear the light, fear whispers of the light. We are shadow-born, and the darkness never ends.
So you have a new album coming out July 1st. We're both very excited about it. And, you've said before that it's kind of an expansion pack / prequel thing to the Clockwork Fable. And we're just curious, what made you want to return to the Clockwork universe?
Yeah, and I just want to add, we're both very happy you're returning to the Clockwork universe, because I think there's more stories to be told there.
Oh, exactly.
But we're just wondering what was the inspiration as a band and for you personally to come back to it.
Well, what actually happened is that, believe it or not, we had loads of material left over from Clockwork Fable. We had about 35-40 minutes worth of songs that couldn't fit onto it. Well, they could fit onto it, but we already had a triple album, and we didn't want to become bloated. We felt that it was possible to make a triple album that captivated people's attention for that really long time span. And we felt that was possible, so we needed not to have it bloated, and we needed to have the songs serving a purpose. So one of the things I think that makes these sort of concepts that we do work is that the songs stand by themselves and they portray the mood, and the narrative parts portray the story. The problem what we had is that we had some songs that were doing the same sort of thing. So we had 2 songs that were sort of a Tinker's theme. So we had Ditchwater Daisies, and we had a song called Wardens. We had 2 songs that were sort of acting as Eve's theme, or Eve's sort of sad song. We had Eve's song, obviously, and we had a song called Solar Huntress. We had 2 songs that were portraying the theme, the motif, an evil sort of bad guy song, like the Imperial March from Star Wars, Darth Vader's sort of theme tune, if you like. And we had 2 songs doing that: the Capture, the riff in that, and 1 song called Blackening. And so the problem was we couldn't have 2 songs serving the same purpose, because that sort of was counterproductive to what we were trying to do. So me and Luke sat down pretty late on in the production, so all these songs were pretty much nearly finished, really, really far along actually. And we had to be really ruthless and cut the songs out. So we were left with Wardens sat there doing nothing, Blackening sat there doing nothing, Solar Huntress sat there doing nothing, and another song actually, which was Supplies for the Festivities, which was entirely written on an octave mandola and a mandolin. and a couple of guitar sort of overdubs to thicken out the sound, which was a really cool thing. I was playing with this octave mandola that a friend of mine had let me look after for a while. And again, it just didn't seem to fit into the story. It was going to slow things down at the point where we wanted to speed things up. So it was a real shame to lose it. So it's actually a hidden song. It's on the new album, obviously. It's on Clockwork Prologue now, but it's actually hidden in the Clockwork Fable. So if you re-listen to the part where they're interrogating the Tinker and there's a big party going on outside and they're giving him a kick in the guts and asking him what he's up to and that sort of thing, if you listen to that section, every time you can hear it in the background, some sort of background music, really quiet. And every time they open the door to leave and storm out, or a guard gets dragged in and they open the door, and you can hear the party spilling out from the street into the room when they open the door. That music that you hear there, that is supplies from the festivities. Like, we're performing there in secret in that festival. And now in Clockwork Prologue, you get to hear that song for real. So that's quite fun. So as you can probably guess where this is going, we were left with all this stuff and we were wondering what we were going to do with it. So we sort of reached out to some of our fans that are on our Facebook group, who are absolutely great for keeping us in check. And we originally thought, what do you want us to do with this stuff? And they bounced a few ideas at us, and we decided, okay, well let's release Christmas single. Which we were writing, which was Winter's Morning, and think about something else. And then we were like, oh, well, hang on, we've got some other Christmas songs that we've done in the past. Why don't we tie them together with a sort of theme? And we could do them as a little Christmas EP. So it gone from now a single to an EP. And then instantly we thought, oh, well, why don't we get Tim back to do the Tinker? And the theme could be him looking through one of his machines that is invented, some contraption that can look throughout history, something like that. And when he's looking through this machine, it's sort of reeling off all these different songs, and he's sort of remarking on them and that kind of thing. And that would be a nice sort of nod to the Clockwork Fable, and it'd be a lot of fun. So we started writing those narrative scenes, and they were really good. It was great to sort of be writing for that character again. So it grew from there. We were like, well, hang on a minute. We've got now all this Clockwork Cogtopolis dialogue stuff, and loads of leftover songs, an EP's worth of songs. So why don't we just have it as a little a prologue album? And so we started to do that, and we wrote it out, and that was, for all intensive purposes, what we were going to do. It was just still going to be a Christmas release, like an EP, but we were going to do it in secret and just put these 4 or 5 songs out that were left over, and then we were going to, put a little bit of narration in there, not tell anyone we were doing it, and just whack it out as a Christmas surprise. This Christmas just gone, that was the plan for it. Problem was that once we started to write the dialogue, it became apparent that there was a little bit of a wider story to tell. And by this point, we had Ben and Kerry as full-time members as well. And we, as well as polishing up the material we already had, the leftover songs, we started writing a couple of extra bits. We thought, oh, well, wouldn't it be nice to end with a sort of reprise of the Lamplighter stuff? And then by the time we'd written the script, we were like, oh, well, hang on a minute, we haven't got a song for this new character, and so we need a song for that. And it grew to the point where it wouldn't fit on one CD anymore, so it needed to be a double album. So it was intended as a Christmas single, and it ended up as a double album. And it wasn't even supposed to be the album we were doing either. We were, at that point, we were writing this massive, big epic album thing that was supposed to be our next album. And then we got sidetracked by doing the Road to Darkness remaster. And then we got sidetracked by doing the Christmas single. And then we got sidetracked by creating the Clockwork Prologue. So it wasn't even like we set out to make this album this big. It just happened to be, like we were capturing lightning in a jar for a second time. And we just ran with it.
Speaking of the new album, what can we expect musically from the new album? So I guess what we mean by that is, how is it different from the Clockwork Fable, and how does it expand upon that universe, musically but sonically as well?
It's very similar. Obviously, for those songs, the entire first disc is the stuff that we had left over from Clockwork Fable. And when you listen to that, you'll realise that these aren't cast-offs that weren't musically good enough, because there's some absolutely killer songs on there. The opening track, Belly of the Earth, was my sort of fallback failsafe in case we couldn't get any of the dialogue done. If we couldn't get any of the narration done, if the actors thing suddenly fell through, I'd written some musical pieces such as Belly of the Earth that would help tell the story along in a musical form. So it would introduce the album, and it fit perfectly. You know, if we're starting a little bit earlier on in the story, then we can, you know, start from there. So the entire first CD is very much from that world. There's a good mix of classic rock. There's all the sort of Hammond stuff that was quite prevalent in Clockwork Fable, but even better now because we have an actual Hammond player in Ben and not me. So it sounds even better, sounds killer. So the exchange between me and Ben on like guitar to Hammond and stuff is now sort of, when it happens, is more in that sort of deep purple natural sort of vein rather than something I have to plan out whenever I would do any sort of synth stuff in the past. There's got some folky stuff in there. It's got some longer compositions, such as we've got this great song Clockmaker, which is full of orchestral counter melodies and dynamics. We got the Lamplighter Overture, which is a really clever piece that Ben sort of originally started and I added to, which revisits a lot of the themes from the Lamplighter suite that happens in Clockwork Fable, but also acts as a sort of reprise of some of the stuff that happens in the new album as well. There's a real mix of stuff. There's a real mix of styles. Vocally, we've got Melissa coming back for one track to play the part of Eve. So Melissa Hollick, who did the female vocals on Clockwork Fable. So she's back for one of the songs where Eve is. But now we've got Kerry as our full-time vocalist, who is a powerful, fantastic vocalist. She's now she's part of our band. She's definitely one of the best singers in the prog scene. I mean, when you listen to this album, I dare you to disagree with me. Listen to a vocal performance on some of these songs. It's absolutely amazing. So it's like Clockwork Fable. It will sound very familiar. It'd be like putting on a pair of old slippers, a comfy old pair of socks. So you'll be right back in that world. But it's a step up again because, we've got Ben taking us to a musical next level. We've got all of us stepping up once again to make it sound better than before sonically, and we've got Kerry to take the vocals, just into the stratosphere from what we've had in the past. That's not to decry what Melissa did. She's a great singer, but Kerry is more of a rock singer and more of a dynamic singer than Melissa, who sort of brought that pop edge to Clockwork Fable.
So you mentioned on the band's website that you've been a fan of video games since the 1980s, and that you see this next album as something of a musical expansion pack, as we mentioned in the last question. What's your favorite video game right now, and is there a game that you think best reflects the Clockwork Fable?
Right, so I used to play video games a lot when I was a kid, and I haven't played them in many years, especially not now. I have young kids and a young family, and I prefer to be doing stuff with them rather than playing computer games. But some of the guys are into computer games. Luke's really into his gaming still. Stefan, I think, is to a certain extent, maybe not so much anymore, but was in the past. Chris, the bassist, when we shared a flat for a few years in Newcastle, and we used to always sort of play computer games together. We used to play multiplayer, the original sort of multiplayer games where you had 4 players split into 4 tiny little corners of the screen. We used to play those quite a lot in his room and have big tournaments along the flats. And that was pretty much the last time I played a computer game. So I couldn't tell you right now what current games would represent the Clockwork Fable. I'm sure there's quite a few in that sort of steampunk aesthetic because it's become quite popular, and so I'm sure there'd be quite a few that would be able to remind you of the sort of image we have in our heads when we listen to the album. In terms of my favourite video game right now is, I recently discovered that on archive.org they have all of the, not all of them, but a lot of the old MS-DOS games that you used to play that you can sort of play on their online simulator. Which is great because what I've been doing is introducing everybody in my office at work, or obviously I have another job apart from being a musician to help pay the bills. And that job, funnily enough, is teaching English. And everybody in the English office, I've been introducing them to some of the old computer games that we used to play. So we've all been playing at the moment the Oregon Trail, and that's been blowing everybody's mind, putting their names into the game and trying to get across America. And I'm sure you've played the game and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but that's been blowing their minds. We've been playing the Oregon Trail at work, and the original one. And and I think, if that's blowing their mind, I dread to think what would happen if I sort of managed to get hold of a virtual reality headset or something, brought it in. They'd probably have some kind of seizure or something. So yeah, at the moment, my favourite game is the Oregon Trail. So maybe our next Gandalf's Fist album can be about that.
So it's obviously no secret that it's quite difficult to make it as a musician today, especially in our beloved niche genre. And many of my favorite artists have been vocal about how difficult it is to be a musician today, especially in regards to like touring out of your own country or continent. And we just wanted to know, like, how do you guys make it work financially? Just like, how do you manage to make it work and like have like like we said in earlier questions, like amazing production, do these like really, really big projects that are really ambitious. How does that just work for you and your band members?
So like I just mentioned, all of us are full-time jobs, not part-time jobs. We all work full-time. We all have careers. I'm a teacher, and Ben, Stefan are in IT, and Chris is in accountancy, blah, 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 blah. So we all have full-time jobs, and this is our relief from that, to be able to do things like this, and to be able to play headlining slots at Hard Rock Hell Prog Festival, which is one of the biggest prog festivals in Europe, I think, and do have people come up to us to ask things to be signed and stuff. That is our relief and our hobby. And we don't try and make it financially successful, or we would be very foolish for us to try to do that, because it isn't. It pays for itself. It does. And if there's any money sort of left over, which there very rarely is, we will use it for something that will help us to make the next album better, so we'll buy a new synthesizer, or we'll spend some of the money on some software that Stefan needs to process his drum recordings, or a new audio interface. And if we're not doing that, we will again reinvest it in something to do with the music. So spend money on getting an LP, a vinyl mastered at Abbey Road, which we did with the money that we made from Clockwork Fable. So none of us are sort of leaning on Gandalf's Fist for any financial support. So that's how we make it work. We don't do it for the money. And we all would love to be in a position where we could do it for the money and we could do this full time. We would really be able to release a lot more albums. It's crazy. We're releasing these really long concepts, big productions, but we're recording them and we're mixing them and we're promoting them and we're shipping everything ourselves, and we all have full-time jobs and we all have families, and some of us have young kids, and so we do it all around that, and we still manage to do it. We wrote, record, mixed, mastered, manufactured, shipped, promoted Clockwork Fable in a year. Pretty much exactly 12 months we did all that. Full-time jobs, families, we did all that 100% ourselves. So we do it as a hobby. So that's pretty much the answer. Whereas other people will go off and they might go cycling, or they might go to the gym, or they might, go and, I don't know, play golf or something. We will do this for the enjoyment of it. And long may that continue. And if it ever becomes a point where it isn't a hobby, then that's probably when you will see us calling it quits in some capacity. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Okay, and our last question is another kind of segment we hope to repeat with all the different musicians that we have on here. And this segment is called Off the Wall, where we ask kind of like a wacky sort of question. So for off the wall question, I'm going to ask you, if the Master and the Monkey were a character in a fighting game, what would his or her finishing move be?
Well, Master and the Monkey is a story straight out of Luke's head. When we originally put that album out at the end of 2010 or early 2011, something like that, we had the accompanying story that Luke had written in about 11 chapters up on our website. I don't know where it is. We might have to find it somewhere. I'm sure it's stored on a hard disk somewhere. So he'd written this full sort of like fairy tale story about a legless frog that sits inside a fez on top of a monkey's head. So there's two real characters there. So you've got Pierre de Gatou, the legless frog, and you've got Francois the monkey. So the frog is the master and Francois is the monkey. So we're just going to have to say that they are both fighting on the same side in this fighting game, I suppose. And since it's from Luke's imagination, the finishing move is probably going to have to be the Whirlwind of Destruction. That's Luke's finishing move, the Whirlwind of Destruction. And since it's from Luke's mind, they would probably personify that as well. They would take on board Luke's destructive powers, and they would finish off their opponents with the Whirlwind. Basically what used to happen was when me and Luke used to go to festivals and stuff together, go and see bands and stuff like that, or go out on a night out around town, a few too many baby shams into Luke, and he could destroy anything in his path. And those of you who've witnessed Luke doing a Whirlwind of Destruction will know exactly what I mean.
Again, we just want to thank Dean Marsh from Gandalf's Fist so much for taking our questions and just being able to do this. You have no idea how much we appreciate it. It's really, really awesome to talk to one of your just musical heroes, and we're so glad you agreed to do this.
Yeah, I'm also very grateful, and hopefully I'll have other guests on in the future, but if not, you're a great one to have on, so thank you very much.
And we're both very excited for the Clockwork Prologue, and everyone should definitely check that out. That is out July 1st. It's going to be amazing, I imagine, and I'm very excited for it. All right, so now we're going to premiere the two songs from the new album, as we promised. We'll play the Solar Huntress first and the Clockmaker second. I hope you guys enjoy those tracks, and we will see you next time on ProgPod.
The spark will be restored. Gather the life you've lived before. Ever the void a crimson door. Tears run down, carry the crown, feeling caught in time. Gather the one you've seen before. Open the gate, a world beyond. Set the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Chase the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Travel the time you dream so fair. Sail on tides of sulfur air. Follow the lines that led you there. Swallow the wine in darkest prayer. Tears run down, feet the ground. Dust kicked in your eyes. Travel the time you dream so fair. Cast your mind beyond despair. Set the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Chase the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Set the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. night was safe and warm, a starling in a cage. Through the bars no beasts could harm, until the huntsman came. When the cage was open wide, the bird took to the wing. Wasn't that a curious thing to hear them sing? Set the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Chase the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Set the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. Chase the sun, it's only yesterday, today. Now there's something going on. All the lies that led you here struggle to rise from childish fears. In your mind the words ring clear, in your eyes a silent tear. Seeds of doubt scream and shout, tormenting your mind. Swallow the lies that led you here. Open your eyes, the truth is clear.
Alright, and now we're going to play the Clockmaker.
come.